Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. I'm Ben. Today I have an exciting announcement, which is that the Our Fantasy Top Novels poll is live, and you can go and vote over the next 6 days if you'd like. I'll put the link in the description. And I just love participating in this poll. I like looking at other people's votes. I like analyzing how it has changed over time. It's quite the interesting snapshot. They're now doing it once every 2 years, and you can vote for anything that is in speculative fiction umbrella, from series to standalone books, fantasy, sci-fi, horror, manga, historical fiction, magical realism. Anything that you think could fall under that umbrella you can vote for. And you can check out previous lists to see what kind of things show up on there. But anything that comes up with at least 5 votes usually finds a place on the final list. So this is a really cool poll where every individual vote might matter a lot to even get some of your favorite books or series on the list at all, or to move them up a bunch of places if they're towards the bottom. So yeah, definitely go vote if you'd like. You don't even have to include all 10 if you don't have 10 favorites, but yeah, include up to 10. Now it's an interesting kind of cross-section of the fantasy fandom that you get with this. So it definitely is biased towards those that are active in the online fantasy community. So I would guess the voting kind of demographics skew younger, and to those who maybe are more involved and read more widely in the fantasy genre. And so even though a lot of really famous popular series are towards the top every time, I'd guess that actually undersells the popularity, because if you polled every fantasy reader around the world, I think some of those ones at the top of the list, like Lord of the Rings and Song of Ice and Fire, would get a lot more votes compared to the others. And so you actually get a lot of votes in here for things that are less widely read and less well known, which is really cool. And also, I'd say overall, the list tends to skew towards fantasy books, first of all, which makes sense for it being Our Fantasy. And it skews towards, even within sci-fi, it's a lot of more of the sci-fantasy books and series that read more like fantasy, like Dune and Red Rising. So there's not that many real hard science fiction things that make this list or high up on the list. Skews away from things like horror and magical realism. It also skews towards adult rather than young adult or middle grade. I do think a lot of people end up putting maybe a childhood favorite series or two. It skews totally away from fantasy romance. So Sarah J. Maas, who just dominates those Goodreads Choice Awards every year in the fantasy, she didn't even make the list at all last time in 2021. So it's a cool list that kind of targets the niche that I mostly read in. So I really love that about it, and that's how I've tried to figure out how to prioritize my reads. I want to read things that are popular with others in the fandom to be part of those conversations, but it also has been fun to track how some of my favorite reads have kind of risen in prominence over the years. So like John Gwynn's Faithful and the Fallen was way down on the list in 2019, but then it popped up into the top 50 in 2021. So I'll be curious to see, if he continues to rise, if he falls. It's a fascinating snapshot of where we are in that moment, because lots of things will come into play with this, including recency bias. And so, certain things that had just come out might show up on that list more so than they would a few years later. Like Tress of the Emerald Sea, which just came out last month, is showing up in a lot of people's votes. So it'll be fascinating in 2 years from now whether that book will continue to rise and have staying power, or whether that was really more just a recency bias of the moment and it will fall off from where it was now. So I like analyzing these types of things, and just have a lot of fun with coming up with my own rankings. And so I'll put up my rankings in my list here from this year and also from the previous one, so you can see how it changed. And I'll also discuss maybe my voting dilemma that I'm having with my last spot. So, first, I'll put up my list actually from 2 years ago, from 2021. And a lot of this, you'll see, will stay the same, but a few of these will have fallen off. So things like Temeraire and The Song of Achilles and Rhaenyra, they are not on this list. I've read a bunch of things that have kind of overtaken them in my favorites. And also, Mistborn I didn't include in my most recent list because I wanted to not double up on any authors, even though Mistborn, the first Mistborn trilogy, definitely and one of my top series. But yeah, so that was my list from a couple years ago, and here is my list currently. So we have some of my real heavy all-time favorites that were truly easy to put on here, like Stormlight Archive and Dresden Files and The Faithful and the Fallen. And Red Rising is a new one, but it falls into that category of reads where I just have gotten completely engaged and emotionally wrapped up while reading those books. And so I'm just going based on that feeling of personal enjoyment and level of grippedness, if you will. And so those have been easy. A new one that has become a favorite is Shadows of the Apt. And if you are a fan of this series and you want to vote for it, definitely go ahead. It only has 2 votes so far. I'd love to see it make the list. I just feel like this is criminally underread because so many people who love Sanderson and John Gwynne, I think, would also really vibe with Shadows of the Apt. So yeah, that's a new one on there. And then the First Law series, and maybe this is heavily due to Stephen Pacey. I just loved listening to those audiobooks all the way from beginning to end. And same goes for Project Hail Mary. I absolutely adore that audiobook and Ray Porter's narration. That came out at the absolute wrong time for this poll because it didn't come out in time for the previous list in 2021, so it missed its kind of recency bias moment to really jump onto the list high. But it'll be curious. I've seen a bunch of votes for it. Be curious to see how it does. Standalones definitely are not favored by this kind of system where standalones and series get lumped together, because with series they offer more pages and more time to get invested in them, and so there's they just have that advantage over the standalones. So the standalones that do make this list, I think, are often really impactful and quite strong and interesting to see which do. And let's see, I also put the Sun Eater on here for the first time. This was an easy choice. I love the Sun Eater, love the main character, first person POV, and I think this Sun Eater likely has staying power for me, and it's going to be finished up over the next couple years, the last 2 books. So I'd be very surprised if that one falls off the list. It's also really exciting. Sun Eater, I think, probably didn't get any votes the last time, but now it has a bunch of votes. It's definitely going to show up on the list. So it's exciting to see, a new favorite series of mine take its place, in this larger fantasy fandom. And I hope it's just going to be a steady rise from here for that one. And then other all-time favorites like Remembrance of Earth's Past, that's the 3-Body Problem trilogy by Cixin Liu. It wasn't too long after I finished that I reread those, and I just absolutely was gripped to the page both times that I read that series. Let's see, what else? I would expect that next time in 2 years there might be some new entries on here. Like, I've only read the Farseer trilogy and Realm of the Elderlings. I think that has potential to jump on. I've only read Game of Thrones, the first book in A Song of Ice and Fire. I think that has potential to jump on in here. And maybe other things like Greenbone Saga or Daniel Abraham's solo series. So there's things I'm hoping I'm going to love so much that they're going to be competing with some of the things on here. Now, let's see. There's the last entry on here that I put that I had some conflict over was the Magician's Trilogy. So this is one of the first fantasy series I read when I came back to fantasy as an adult. And I think it definitely has a more prominent place in my memory because of that, and I didn't have too many other things to compare it to. Love the audiobooks, got completely wrapped up in it and emotionally invested. But I'm trying to judge it against things I read more recently. So The Warlord Chronicles by Bernard Cornwell is a more recent favorite, and it's really hard for me to rank those against each other. They actually both right now have 4 votes. So I might wait until closer to the end of the poll to see if either of these series picks up any other votes, because if my vote is the difference between it getting on to the list or not, I'll probably change it to the Warlord Chronicles. But yeah, I love both of those series, and it's really hard for me to decide on that last one. Also, Warlord Chronicles, it feels very speculative in nature. There's a kind of ambiguous, is there magic element to it? Also, it's not based on an era with lots of historical sources, so it's a lot of just pure invention from Cornwell. Pretty unlike the Sharp series, which has a lot of very fact-based kind of battles from the Napoleonic era alongside completely fictionalized characters as well. So that feels less speculative, but the Warlord Chronicles feels like it would be at home in this list, and it's fun to see it getting some votes, and so I'd love to see it make the list. So yeah, if you haven't voted yet on the list, if you haven't gone over there, definitely go over, put in your votes, and yeah, you can decide how to do it any which way you want. Whether you want to vote for just all things that are more or less popular, whether you want to really stick to what your top 10 is, and if that means doubling or tripling up on some authors, that's great too. I just love seeing all the different lists that people have and where I overlap or where I just have not heard of anything on people's lists, which is really fun. And so yeah, it's a very cool thing. And let your voice be heard if you would like, and let me know what your list ends up looking like. And yeah, have a great week.